I planned to visit you on my way to Macedonia and to come back to you from Macedonia and then have you send me on my way to Judea. That is 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 16. Now, where do we find a spiritual message in that? That's going to be quite a project, you think? Finding a deep spiritual message in that. It's just travel plans that Paul didn't even follow. It didn't even work out. He's talking about the plans that he had that didn't work out. What's the benefit for us? As in the previous lesson, digging and praying and digging, I found a nugget. A sparkling, shiny nugget in the midst of it. A piece of wisdom that we can learn. Now, I will tell you ahead of time, this piece of wisdom applies most primarily to missionaries. Some of you that might be listening might be missionaries. Some of you might be dealing with missionaries. Some of you might be sponsoring missionaries. And some of you might be inflicted by missionaries coming to your home country. No, I meant blessed by missionaries coming to your home country. Excuse me. Sometimes it's a little bit of both. And that's what I want to deal with. Paul says, and have you send me on my way. Now, in this case, to Judea, but send me on my way. Now, I'm going to explain a little bit of geography. What was Corinth? Now, almost everything that you read about Corinth is wrong. The reason is that almost everything in all the commentaries about Corinth is based on some detailed, extensive writing about the ancient city of Corinth that was written by a geographer who wrote about 200 years before the time of Christ. And this ancient geographer, wrote a lurid description of the corruption that was in that city of Corinth, although some of the things that we would call corruption, he did not consider corruption. He talks about the great fertility goddess temple on the top of the hill and how they worship there, and it is the kind of thing that in another place Paul says these are things that we shouldn't even soil our lips with talking about. Okay? That's not the exact quote, but that's the gist. Now, there's only one problem with that. Laying aside that there's a 200-year gap, and Bible times, things didn't change that much. And that's somewhat true. There's just one little problem. There was a war, an intervening war. And that ancient city that writer wrote about was totally not just defeated, it was annihilated. Everyone who wasn't killed was sold into slavery, shipped far away. And the city itself was scraped right down to bare rock. Nothing left. So most of what you read about Corinth is wrong. But we do know some things about the Roman city of Corinth. The Greco-Roman city of Corinth was primarily by this time a Roman city, although it was not a colony, because it is the shipping point. There is a peninsula. There's a narrow isthmus, very narrow. It's so narrow now it's not an isthmus anymore. Now there's a marvelous shipping canal and a marvelous bridge over the shipping canal that goes high over it, and everybody's happy. But there wasn't that then. And there was an inclined plane where they would actually haul ships up on rollers up over this inclined plane, because it was only a mile or two from one side to the other, and you had to go 100 miles of very bad, treacherous sea to go around. And then you just go 1 mile over land. So even if you didn't take your ship over, they would take the cargo over and the passengers would walk over. So every journey went through there. It was kind of like the Panama Canal of the ancient world. But culturally, it was more like the city today of Singapore, which is in a narrow strait. And all the shipping in the world, it seems like, passes through Singapore. And all the shipping of the ancient world went through Corinth. So if you needed to know something about shipping, where would you find an expert? You would find them in Corinth. So here is Paul. He is the apostle to the Gentiles. That means God's delegate with authority. He grew up not terribly far from Corinth in a city, a Greek city called Tarsus. And, and he's a world traveler, the kind of person, he would just, book his own ticket. Wrong. He's saying, I hoped you would send me on my way. What does he mean here? In the context that he's going to Corinth, of all places, he's saying, travel is rough. Travel's difficult on the Mediterranean. Everybody knew that. Getting a trustworthy ship, how do you know that this crew knows what they're doing? How do you know this captain knows what you're doing? How do you know this ship is seaworthy? How do you know that the route they're taking is the right route and not some foolish route that's going to end up with you stranded somewhere? How do you know all that? In the church in Corinth, there would be people in the shipping business who would know that. And Paul is saying, I was going to trust myself to you to get me the right ticket back to Judea. We need to trust one another in the church. We need to recognize who has expertise in different things. If you're building something for the church, the right person to make those nitty-gritty decisions is not the person with the most Bible knowledge. It's the person who's been working with concrete all his life. When you go overseas, I've learned this the hard way, I'll guarantee you, because I thought I knew everything before I went over to India the first time. Oh, you need to trust the local people. They know more about where they live than you do. And they know how to get from point A to point B, where they are. And that is the lesson we can learn from this verse.